I'd like to welcome everybody to what I think is going to be a pretty unique session, and certainly dealing with a topic that is not usually looked at through this prism. And that is to look at the issue of aging from the perspective of investment opportunities and business opportunities. So before anything else, I just wanted to introduce everyone. To my right is Roger Baumgart, who's the CEO of Home Instead. And I'll just say we're not going to go through bios and all of that. They're in the book, and we have an hour and a lot of people, and so let's focus on the meat. John Beard is director of the World Health Organization in the Department of Aging and Life Course. I thought that's a fascinating title, Life Course.
I can stick my nose in anywhere.
Yeah, it's good to have titles like mine. Catherine Collinson is president of the Transamerica Institute and president of the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies, a term, retirement, that we will definitely address with a little more focus. To her left is Michael Hoden, who's the executive director of the Global Coalition on Aging, which is comprised of several Fortune 100 firms, you'd say, really some of the top international companies. And he's also a managing partner of a consulting organization called the High Lantern Group. And then sitting in, our utility infielder and pitch hitter for Joe Coughlin, who has a double ear infection, we've been told, is, what's here? Oh, Paul Irving, president of the Milken Institute, who most recently, and everybody should definitely go to the bookstore, is the editor of a new book on the upside of aging. So I'm one of these people who believes that context is everything. And unless you have that context and a way to fit facts within that paradigm, it's really just a bunch of data. So I wanted to just kind of level set at the beginning and really tap the knowledge and insight of our panelists. And start with you, Catherine, because you were saying that you all have just released some new a new study, the results of a new study on retirement, and I just want to tell my joke. So there was a time when retirement was viewed as just I'm longing for inactivity. Right? Eisenhower, the story goes, they asked him, well, so Mr. President, what are you going to do now that you're leaving the White House? And he said, well, I'm going to go back to my home in Virginia. I'm going to sit on my rocking chair on the porch. And after about 6 months, I might consider rocking. I don't think anybody has that view of inactivity as a goal anymore. So why don't you share with us what you've learned?
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm very pleased to share with everyone that today, Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies just launched its 15th annual retirement survey. And I'd like to share with you some of the findings about baby boomers, and we'll start on slide 3, that really illustrate that our parents' vision of retirement or our grandparents' vision or that rocking chair is more fiction than it is reality today. So looking at baby boomers, 2014, by the way, is a big year. The last of the baby boomers turned 50 this year, which also means that Gen X starts turning 50 next year, which is kind of hard to comprehend. I'm not sure how that happened.
And they will be receiving their AARP invitation very soon.
Yeah, well, and I will also add, I am a baby boomer, and I responded to my AARP invitation, so I am a member. But our vision of retirement, and I'm sharing the baby boomer trends, these cross future generations, they cross Gen X and millennials as well. 65% of baby boomers plan to retire after the age of 65 or simply do not plan to retire. This is a big, big change, sea change from the idea that you work until 65 and then you're done. Turning to slide 5, most envision a transition into retirement. 2 out of 3, or 67%, envision some form of transition into retirement that involves shifting from full-time to part-time with more time to enjoy life, or maybe taking on a job but in a different capacity, say an encore career or something that's more personally satisfying, or perhaps even just less stressful or demanding. Only 1 in 5 envision a retirement where they just stop working. That's our reality, and it even raises the question, is the word retirement even appropriate anymore for this type of transition? And with that, though, we also found some pretty serious disconnects, and I'd like to turn to slide 6 now, which illustrate many baby boomers, and we see this, by the way, with Gen X as well, aren't doing enough to be proactive so that they can continue working past 65. And part of this is the world is changing so fast. I will tell you, when I entered the workforce, electric typewriters were modern technology. Now, looking 5 years out, there might just be something that's attached to our brain and goes to the computer. I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility. But what we see with baby boomers, and by the way, this applies to younger workers as well, this isn't necessarily an age thing, is many aren't doing enough to keep their skills up to date, to stay relevant in today's employment market. We see 41% say they're doing so. And then fewer than 20% are doing things like networking, scoping out what employment opportunities are, or even considering going back to school to get new skills. So that's one part of the disconnect. And then the second, which is on slide 7, is I mentioned previously, many envision a transition into retirement. However, few say their employers will actually accommodate such a transition. Only 1 in 5 say that their employer has any sort of program in place to accommodate the desire to shift from full-time to part-time, which frankly is a huge disconnect, and one of the problems that I hope we can discuss today and sort of strive to make part of the conversation and what we can do to help bridge these disconnects and solve these problems.
So the flip side of these challenges is really huge business opportunity. And whether it's helping people stay, current with their skills, whether it's helping them figure out how to plan, embedded in all of this, there's things that can be done, and frankly, there's ways for people to make money doing it.
And I'm so glad you asked that, because we need to reframe all of these problems as opportunities. And as I just went through this data, we have amazing opportunities. One, we have a trained, skilled workforce that wants to continue working and has wonderful things to offer. We also see the need for continuing education, yet based on the lack of response of people taking advantage, it shows that we need to update our continuing education, which is an opportunity for educators. And then for an employer, there's fantastic opportunities to work with their employees so that they can maximize their value as they're looking to do things like shift from full-time to part-time, but also have tremendous opportunity in terms of training, mentoring, and even succession planning.
So John, why don't you give us an idea of how these trends are playing out globally?
Okay, and I think that'll fit well, because I'd like to really pick up on this whole idea of reframing how we think about aging, because I think at the moment we think in a very narrow and constrictive way, and it actually prevents people seeing the opportunities that are available to them. So if we can have slide 1. There are many misconceptions about aging, and one of them is that it's an issue for the rich world, that it's basically North America, Europe, and Japan which are affected. And if you look today, you might say that's the case. So this is a map of the population, looking at the proportion of the population that's over the age 60, and you'll see that only one country in the world at the moment has a proportion that's greater than 30%, and that's Japan. But if we go to slide 2, which is in the middle of the century, 2050, you'll see that's completely changed, very dramatic change. And the change may not be occurring in the places you think. So in fact, what you'll see here in the United States, the change is not nearly as dramatic as in some other places. For example, China, Vietnam, Thailand, Iran, Chile. these are probably not places that you're thinking when you think about population aging. And each of these places is needing to go through this experience at a much shorter period of time than was the case for Europe and the United States. So there's many, many challenges in each of those countries. Now, when you look at that, I think the first message for business is think about the market. Is there anywhere in the world where this issue is not going to impact on your markets? The second one is, when I hear the US complain about the financial sustainability, the pressure that's going to be placed on them by population aging, there are places in the world which have already experienced what you will experience at the peak, and they've somehow managed to do it sustainably. So I think that there needs to be that note of realism. But the third is that when people look at this map and they see this darkness, it's like, well, this is a big problem. This is a threat. This is the tsunami that's taking us all over, and we worry about these economic sustainability issues. But that darkness reflects a whole diversity of experience for older people. So there's not one old. You know, there can be. I worked before my current job with the World Health Organization. I worked in New York for the New York Academy of Medicine. My boss was 86 years old, the president of Jerry Barandes. He was a dynamic person who really transformed the organization. So an 86-year-old can be like that, but you can imagine that perhaps his doorman, who in his Upper East Side apartment, who maybe a Hispanic background, poorly educated, gets to 60, and the likelihood is that person's going to have poorer health, they're going to have poorer opportunities, and their experience of aging is going to be very different. So when we see this darkness, what we want to do is try and make more people like Jerry Barandes, and try and make sure that that incredible human resource that's inherent in older populations is more available for us to use, and that less people are like his doorman. So I think we need to think about how we can do that. And then from a business perspective, I think there's three key issues. One is understanding the market and understanding, first of all, that aging is a global issue, but secondly, that being old in the 21st century is not going to be the same as being old in the 20th century, and we shouldn't be stuck in those stereotypes. Secondly, understanding that it's a real issue in terms of the workforce, and businesses are going to be needing to think how they can retain and maintain their workforce in an era where many people are going to be starting to get older. And the third one is, I think it presents a whole lot of leadership opportunities for business globally.
Roger, you are the CEO and represent an organization that is, very focused and deep on this issue of aging in the 21st century. And what can you bring from what you see to this discussion of just kind of setting the context here?
Well, Homestead Senior Care is a company that delivers non-medical home care to seniors all over the world. We have 1,000 franchise offices in 18 different countries. And we employ about 65,000 caregivers those caregivers last year provided over 50 million hours of service globally. For us, one of the bigger challenges, and right in the same vein as this conversation, is and one of the limiting factors for our ability to serve more seniors is to have enough of the right kind of people to provide care, to be caregivers for us. Today, a third of our 65,000 caregivers are seniors themselves. So we are really utilizing that segment of the employment market. And some of them are working because they have to, and some of them are working just because they want to stay active. And they find the work that they do for us being very purposeful. So I see a lot of different opportunities within this framework. Seniors, and Catherine mentioned it, second, encore careers. Seniors make great entrepreneurs. They come with tremendous life experience and emotional intelligence. Many of them have tremendous experience working with and managing different types of people. So many of our franchise
What percentage of people over 50 are franchise owners?
I would guess nearly 40%. And both men and women. And an interesting tale is along John's same line of thought with his boss that was 86. The oldest person that ever bought a franchise from us this guy was a serial entrepreneur. He'd owned a bunch of restaurants, but he was 81 when he bought his franchise, and he operated it with his wife successfully for 7 or 8 years. So there's a tremendous opportunity in this marketplace. When I talk about the caregivers and our need, a great investment opportunity may be in helping us and others like us fill our workforce through educational efforts or training efforts. And so I think within the framework, there is just a tremendous amount of opportunity in the care model, in the workforce, and investment opportunities in creative investment opportunities in research and in the ability to finance care, because not everybody can pay for it.
So, Mike, in addition to your obvious great salesmanship, in pitching, participation and membership in the Global Coalition on Aging, why do these, great companies like, Intel, I think Novartis is a member, these are great companies. What is it about this issue that leads them to say, we need to be in an organization that allows us to talk to others that are of similar stature about these issues? What are the issues that they're concerned about?
I will actually answer that and then pivot to what I was going to say anyway. 3 reasons.
I knew he was going to do that.
3 reasons. One is people are actually seeing, and even over the last 2 or 3 years, beginning to see even more the business opportunity. Discretionary spend is in that demographic of people who are over 55, and that's true globally. And secondly, there are many, many, many more of us. Slide, I don't know what slide it was, but there was a slide that we had that showed, slide 10 shows that there will be 1 billion of us over 60 by 2020, which is in the planning horizon for most companies, or ought to be, certainly. 1 billion. Second, the recognition in the context of this growing market and different proportion, which I will come to in a second, the need for a different model of workplace and workforce standards and operation in the 21st century. And then third, the growing recognition that this aging phenomenon, which we haven't quite defined, but is something like perhaps the women's movement, or the environmental or green movement, or some have even related it to, from an American point of view, civil rights. The point being that there are many corporations that are looking at it as, if we engage in this area, we will also address the vernacular of corporate social responsibility. Frankly, my hope is that the first two are greater drivers, because then it will be more embedded. So let me come back to the point that relates to the second around workplace changes, which also is the huge impact, I would suggest, for society at large and therefore public policy. And it is reflected in slide 18, if we can pull that up. There are basically 2 phenomena that are at play here, which cause this transformational moment, which, as John said, is global. One is that we're living longer. That's huge. And that's mainly what we focus on. And we talk about it in the context of, what are we going to do with all these 65 or 75 or 85-year-olds that's different than the 20th century? But the second point, which actually has a greater impact from the standpoint of workplaces and even broader society, is low birth rates. Correlated with modernization, the women's movement, and a few other large global trends, we have people are not making babies, bluntly. And you've got a profound shift in the proportion of old to young in society. So when John talks about population aging, that's a different notion than aging itself, in the sense that it means that what is the proportion of those over 50 or 55 or 60 to those younger? And in a working environment, let's say from age 18 or 20 up to that 50 or 55. And this slide begins to give you where we are today. And if you look to the right, 2033, which from a public policy point of view and even from a strategy point of view for companies that are a little more thoughtful and progressive, these kind of numbers are unsustainable with the 20th century model. Look at Japan, or Germany, or Italy, which have among the oldest populations on the planet as a proportion of old to young, where you get to 40 and 50% of the population over 50. You simply cannot manage that fiscally from a healthcare point of view, from a pension point of view. A global corporation that, as several of my colleagues said, are looking to attract and retain the best talent. As they draw their lines out, there are just fewer of those around in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And why not therefore look to 60s, 70s, and 80s, particularly in a world where we can be healthier, more active, more engaged, and as Catherine said, a greater desire. So I would encourage all of us to consider that the longevity itself, if that's all we were dealing with, that we're living longer, that would be a very different set of issues, a very different set of challenges and opportunities. It's the low birth rates that gives the proportion the shift. And then the other point I would suggest is we often, all of us, including myself, get stuck in the moment. And so we think of it in terms of the baby boomer bulge, or particularly in the developed, well, everywhere probably, but the problems around the financial crisis we just came out of. Those are two things that are catalyzing what is a transformational shift that we've never seen before in the history of the world, and that is with us at least for the next 2 to 3 generations. One of our colleagues who runs and leads the Institute on Aging at Oxford, Sarah Harper, gave the London Oxford lecture 2 years ago. And in it she said, a young girl born in the mid-90s is likely to see 3 centuries. She is also likely to have less babies than my grandmother did. If we think the 20th century model is going to work for her or for society, we're nuts. And so changing both from a company point of view and from a society point of view is essential.
So Paul, you just edited this book, The Upside of Aging. I promised you I would mention that. And it really is a book that covers a broad swath of topics and issues around this opportunity. So having heard what our fellow panelists have said, what would you draw on to kind of round out the picture?
Jody, I think we start with the notion that every major challenge, and pardon my voice, every major challenge represents a huge opportunity. So I would re-emphasize, I'm glad Mike mentioned the women's movement, the civil rights movement. We are at the early stages in this room of a, thanks Mike, I got one, of a gigantic global cultural shift. And we can't underestimate the importance of that shift. Much of it is driven by demographics. Some of it will be driven by attitude, very much, and the demographic characteristics of our country, for example, just in the United States, existed before we embraced the notion that diversity was an important issue for us to address, and before women should be invited into the workplace and provided the opportunity to realize their talent. Much the same considerations exist for this cohort. So We hear routinely scary stories about aging countries in decline, about the reduction in opportunities, and I would make the case that this is a remarkable opportunity for businesses, Jody. So let me just give you a few examples. So in healthcare, and by the way, these are things that are driven by need. We know, for example, in the United States, about 40% of our adult population is obese. Obesity becomes an increasing problem in older age. If we don't address obesity, the costs of entitlements and the costs of healthcare can swamp us. There are opportunities, whether they're Fitbits or interesting digital applications, or frankly just behavioral change opportunities that we can begin to embed in our business systems that create fantastic opportunities for business and benefits for people. My wife, sitting in the audience, is in the real estate business. It's unbelievable to me that more people aren't thinking about things like home retrofitting, right? So Roger is an example of a business that recognizes that most of us want to age in place. We don't want to move to retirement communities in Florida and Arizona. We don't want to go to homes, and there's not enough opportunity for us to remain in our existing homes. And why? Stairways and cabinets and latches and so many other things, Roger, that I know you and your folks deal with every day. Who are in those businesses focusing on the great opportunities for change? I want to continue driving my car. I'm glad that the folks at Google are working on driverless cars. I'm hoping I'll be able to just give instructions. And by the way, there is an example of innovation to serve aging, because we have to get to where we want to be, whether it's lifelong learning or cultural opportunities or engagement with friends and family. And those are the kinds of things that people are thinking about. So I just want to pull us back to the overarching theme that across America and across the world, the opportunities to take advantage of these challenges, the marriage of challenge and innovation and opportunity, you and I have talked a lot about. I wrote a piece for Forbes on the longevity economy. One of the phrases I use routinely is that economic growth occurs at the intersection of demographic change and innovation. This is the area globally where that opportunity exists in a most robust way. So I think if I had a piece of homework for all of us and for the audience, is to go back and think about all of the things that we can do, that we can invest in, that we can build, that we can create, that we can develop, whether it's in the Silicon Valley or in Europe or Asia, to serve this dramatically expanding audience for our products and services.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Paul, I really agree, but I've engaged a lot with corporations around the world. And what shocks me is how their ageist stereotypes of what it is to be an older person is actually limiting the opportunities that are there for them.
Absolutely.
And I think it's great that you've mentioned the Google car, Google glasses. These are things, probably one of the biggest and earliest markets will be older people. But I hope the designers are thinking, as they design that, about what it is that older person might be looking for. And if you have an app for Google Glasses, are they thinking about some of the things that might assist an older person? And let me give you an example of how not to do it. In Japan, about 10 or 12 years ago, a company came up with the idea of a mobile phone for older people. So they called it the Raku phone, the easy phone. And the Raku phone was a brick, right? It had big buttons, so older people could see the big buttons. And it's like you're putting a sticker on your head, like, I'm stupid, Nobody wanted that phone, and it was an absolute, it completely bombed. But then they decided to reinvent it. And what they designed it as was instead a mobile phone for first-time 4G users that had absolutely every gizmo and app that you could possibly want, but in a beautifully simplistic and accessible and understandable way. And it even had apps, for example, that if the person on the end of the phone was talking too fast for you, you press the button and they slow down. So you can actually understand them. Now, I actually want the other button that speeds them up sometimes. But anyway, that phone became the #2 seller in Japan, and it's now going global. It's about to be released in the US, and it's been released in Europe. And I think there's a really big lesson there for the private sector in terms of understanding the market, understanding what it is to be an older person. I'm about to turn 59, and I'm about to have a child. I mean, is that the stereotype that a company is thinking of at the moment? What are they going to provide me with that's going to make it easier for me to be a father when I'm 65 or 70? And I'm not going to be alone. And so the world is changing. There's a whole lot of social changes that are accompanying this demographic transition, and people need to understand. They need to get out there and talk to older people and find out what it is they actually, the life they want to live, and what they can provide that'll make it easier for them to do it.
One of the things you speak to is clearly the need for education. And where I went with the Raku Raku, I was thinking of the Chevy Nova in Mexico, which also didn't go because it was Nova. But and they couldn't figure out why it didn't sell in Mexico. But there is this perception, particularly in Washington, and Paul's heard me say this many times, where the perception in Washington is that serving the needs of over 100 million people is viewed as an unaffordable cost and financial burden. In the private sector, serving the needs of 100 million people is called an opportunity.
Yeah.
And depending on which door you walk through, it is a completely different conversation. So, part of it is also recognizing that, people throw out, at least in the U.S., and I can't speak to Europe, but in the U.S. they throw out these generalizations about how, well, we can't afford these old people. Old people are an economic drain on the country, and they throw out like the use of economic drain or the economy can't afford it. And actually, that's not what they're talking about, right? They're talking about a couple of programs and their design entitlements. So security. But when you do the economic analysis, it actually turns out that older people and their consumer demand is a primary driver of economic growth in the United States, that when it ripples through the economy accounts for $7.1 trillion in absolute economic activity. And if you were to call the longevity economy a country unto itself in the United States, it would make it the third largest economy in the world after the US and China, and over $2 trillion larger than Japan. $3.1 trillion in consumer spending, $1.6 trillion on top of that in healthcare spending. And when you start to look at it that way, then you understand why increasingly, for example, an area that I focus on, which is venture capital and startups. And by the way, if you don't think about venture investment, startups, innovation, entrepreneurism when you think about AARP, you don't know ARP. But be that as it may, there's a huge amount of activity, particularly in healthcare. But we can speak to some of the specifics. But it's over $1 billion in just the last 3 years of investment.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in. And with this conversation and some other things that I've been hearing here at the Milken Conference, disruptors are a hot topic. And in this very room a couple days ago, there was a fantastic panel on disruption. If you weren't here in person, highly recommend you watching it on YouTube. And talking about what are some of the fundamental ingredients of something that is ripe for disruption. Well, when we talk about aging and investment opportunities, we are ripe for disruption. We have the demographics, we have the number of people, we're in an environment that has rapidly changed in terms of technology, healthcare, people living longer. I don't know about all of you, but as a baby boomer, I'm too young to be old. I don't plan on growing old anytime soon. And yet, the times haven't kept up with this. And one of the things that I walked away from the disruptor panel is taking a complicated problem, putting on a new lens, simple solutions. And where do we start? And taking it a step further, of the disruptors we had here on the stage, the types of things that are finding an audience rapidly. will.i.am had this gadget on his bracelet, on his wrist. It looked like a bracelet. He wouldn't tell us what it was, but it's sort of top secret. And I think it might be a smart device. To Kimball Musk's community gardens for local food sourcing, to a conversation about Uber. These solutions were not designed with aging people in mind, yet every single one has a tremendous application for people of all ages. And even raising the question, as we are dealing in this world of innovation, disruption, new technology, shouldn't we be designing things for everyone? And frankly, if you design for an older person, it's going to work really well for youth. But if you design something for just youth, it's not going to transcend. Or at least in most cases, it won't transcend as well.
So I joke that the one question that a company never wants to get from its board of directors or its investors is, why did you leave money on the table by ignoring the only humongous growth market that exists? What are you going to say, Mike?
And that is a good way to think about this topic, certainly from a business point of view. Catherine's framework, which is essentially a prism through which to understand opportunities for growth. There are no companies I'm aware of who have not looked at a China or an India or an Eastern Europe after the end of the Soviet Union as a place that had to be, where there had to be investments, where there had to be opportunities. With 1 billion of us over 60 in the next few years, that can be thought of as an opportunity if you then back into business development, research and development, the disruption that we're talking about. And then all of that then begins to also align to a different kind of workforce. Because as Paul mentioned, and we certainly know here in America, if you really think you want to apply business principles toward what are regarded as diversity populations, an example might be the growth Hispanic market in America. It might be a nice idea to have a few Hispanics working on your marketing team. So, you know, or the female population is another example, which now it's so embedded, maybe not as much as it ought to be, but certainly more than it was 30 or 40 years ago when I started. A good example of a company that has done that, and out of necessity, frankly, which is, I think, the best driver, in a way, sort of contrary to John's examples, about which he is absolutely right. BMW in their Bavarian plant over in Germany. And as you saw from one of those slides, Germany is one of the oldest populations on the planet, which means they've been making fewer and fewer babies. They're living longer, like we are. And therefore, in that Bavarian plant, it was getting harder and harder to replace workers who, by 20th century standards, would be, quote unquote, retiring. And so what they began to do was figure out ways to keep a 55 or a 60 or a 65 or a 70-year-old, keep them working. Maybe make working conditions a little bit more attractive to them that range from changing the floor where they were standing to the number of hours they might have worked in the assembly plant, so it's not just white collar, to flexibility around how many hours or days a week you worked. And guess what? Productivity went up enormously, and also for the 32-year-old, which is the point. So, you know, there are ways to look at this as a screen through which you get opportunity in the same way many in the business development and strategy parts of all of our Fortune 100, 500, 1,000 companies had looked at what should we do about China or India.
That BMW example is fascinating because as a result of that, first of all, that entire investment cost them about $50,000. So it's peanuts, not even a rounding error. But the other thing about it was that it resulted in the lowest absenteeism of any production line in the entire company. So when you think about how that productivity could cascade not just through BMW as a company beyond that one facility, but cascade if that orientation was taken throughout auto manufacturing and then manufacturing writ large, I mean, we are talking about real economic value creation.
Jody, can I want to make a point about intergenerational concerns, because I think one of the things that you hear sometimes, and by the way, without any data to support it, is that there is this challenge. We have to move people out of the workforce, out of in some respects the consumer base, to enable Xers and Yers, millennials to move up. It's an incredibly kind of zero-sum game analysis of the problem. By the way, I would say very much the view, maybe sadly, of white men who were afraid of women entering the workforce because of the risks of displacement or the embrace of communities of color. The truth of the matter is you add people to the economy or retain people in the economy, guess what? The economy is elastic, the economy grows. There's been a lot of great work done on the aging brain, more and more. There's not enough work being done on it. It's something that we all need more on, but more and more evidence suggests that the kinds of characteristics that we know exist in aging. So for example, I'm about to turn 62. I know my short-term memory is not as good as my short-term memory was when I was 25. I also know that I'm a lot wiser, have a lot better judgment, much better problem-solving capabilities, better relationship network, more opportunity, and ability to problem solve. So what's happening is people are recognizing that, for example, the most innovative companies are not companies that stick two 30-year-olds in a room and say solve a problem, or frankly stick two 60-year-olds in a room and say solve a problem. It's that wonderful complement of the aging brain and the younger brain, complementary skills, talents, et cetera, that really create the opportunity for innovation. So my point, I guess, about the opportunity here is this is not just an opportunity for older people. It's not just an opportunity for those younger people who will become old. It's a current opportunity that spreads across the age range. And by the way, again, invoking our friends at Google, a young company principally populated by younger people who are producing products and services that will enrich the lives of people across the age range.
So, the iPad, right? A 5-year-old or an 85-year-old can use it. Example of universal design or design for all. Your TV remote, it's called design for none. Right? Nobody can figure out this thing. Even tech support in my home, which is my 16-year-old twins, they can't figure it out either. Had to get Geek Squad. By the way, there's an AARP discount for that. John, you gave us an example of the Raku Raku, how they hit the wall initially, pivoted. There's a company in this country, Great Call, that also came in with the jitterbug and has now moved to actually start to use cell phones as a platform for a whole range of other services, particularly in the healthcare area. What are some other examples, just looking around the world, where either massive failures or just really interesting advances?
I'm not so sure in terms of corporations, but one of the initiatives we have at WHO is the Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities. And I think it's really interesting because what it requires is for the mayor or the municipality to send us a letter of commitment that they're going to assess how age-friendly they are, how supportive their environment is for the older people who might live there, and then commit to a process of actually improving that. And what has been really amazing is some of the really neat ideas that come up in different parts of the world that are very simple things that actually make a big difference. So, for example, in New York, which was the first city to join, we had an event with Michael Bloomberg. They found a couple of things. One was that older people always complain that there's not enough seats when they go out walking and there's not enough toilets. So one of the initiatives that they had in New York was to pull together some of the local businesses, and you can imagine some of them are fairly big in New York City, to form an age-friendly New York businesses initiative. And if you go to New York City now, you'll see a little sticker on some businesses that says we're an age-friendly business. And in that retail premises normally, there will be things like there will be a seat for somebody to sit down on. And if an older person goes in there, they can use the toilet without asking. You know, there's no... Now, it didn't cost the city to actually provide that service, but for the corporation that actually joins, they actually get somebody who's either themselves a potential customer, or they might be there with a younger member of the family who's a potential customer for no cost. But it just requires them to think a little bit innovatively. So I think to me, it's more about trying to reframe the way people think about their potential market and the society they sit in, and shift from this idea that an older person, that there's a chronological age where suddenly somebody becomes old and they want to be in the rocking chair, and basically we just need to provide support for them. So it really requires, I think, a shift from, we've talked a little bit about retirement, and I'd be interested in what the other panelists think about it, but to me the whole notion of retirement is outdated, and we need to be thinking in other ways of achieving that.
Yeah, Rod.
I'd like to add on to what John was saying there, and then, you know, in the UK, David Cameron has taken on Alzheimer's full force. I mean, he called a G8 summit and gathered people to, you know, really address this problem. One of the interesting things that they're doing is creating dementia-friendly cities. And we sponsored a conversation in actually three, one in Washington, D.C., one in London, and one in Beijing, around Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we purposely did was bring some people into this panel discussion that are actually living with Alzheimer's. And one of them was Norman McNamara in London. And he's an incredibly articulate guy for having Alzheimer's, and he's 57, he's had it for 8 years. But he's the sponsor, and he is the guy that has went on this campaign to create these dementia-friendly cities. And just an example of it is when somebody comes in and they wear these little pins to a grocery store. The people in the grocery store recognize this individual and help them with their shopping, and they know they might well walk out without paying, you know, but they've got the system in place. So I think that's a very unique, and it's another example of a small thing, you know. But Alzheimer's, to Paul's point about greatest challenges are greatest opportunities. From our perspective, Alzheimer's is truly a great challenge. It's you know, one that if you're 60 years of age and you're a woman, you got one in 6 chance that you're going to have Alzheimer's. If you're 60 years old and you're a man, you have 1 in 11. But Alzheimer's also represents great opportunities for business investment in the research side, and you know, we know there's not a cure in sight. So you can invest in that side, but on the other side of it, we have millions of people who need care today for Alzheimer's. And so investing in new innovative ways of care is also another way that we can help those people through those situations.
So Roger, assuming that there's some budding entrepreneurs in the audience, and you had your short list of things you wished that they would bring to your attention, and solutions that they would bring to you, what might the top 2 be?
Well, the top one is what I mentioned before, and that's enough of the right type of caregivers. You know, there's an increasing need daily of people that require care. So the right type of people to become a caregiver. We're very selective in the people that we bring in. And, you know, to Paul's point about as you get older, you're a little bit better at relationships. And that's why we hire so many people that are seniors to serve seniors, because they're fantastic at building that rapport and that relationship, which is key to success in providing the right type of care. And I think the second thing would be we've made an innovation in our business model a couple of years ago, which is a new training method that we've trained our caregivers for Alzheimer's specifically. We had a clinical training program for them that was, you talked about the plaque on the brain. Our caregivers didn't need that. What they needed was a training program that would help them deal with the behaviors they face. And it's been very well received. So, you know, we're able now to care for more people and keep them in the home that have Alzheimer's. So one of my wishes would be that somebody would come to me and say, we have a better, more surefire way of diagnosing Alzheimer's. I mean, we're getting better at it, but we really need that, because with early diagnosis, just like cancer or any other disease, we have a much better opportunity to create a plan for care and to actually prolong the time that they can be in the home.
Let me give you a couple of examples also on dementia, because it's an absolutely critical issue. One from the patient perspective and one from the carer perspective, because I think there's those two dimensions. From the patient perspective, in that UK initiative, there was a fantastic advertisement which involved another woman who had dementia, and she, in 30 seconds, she talked a little bit about her life. And then the punchline at the end was she looked to the camera and she said, yes, I have dementia, but I also have a life. And I think understanding that people with dementia, and there are millions of them, actually are still humans and still have a life and still have meaning and are looking for things that will help them do the things that they want to do. I think that's important, and that's where I think perhaps apps for things like Google Glasses, which will help with facial recognition, or other memory jotters or GPS sort of type resources could be really useful for the individual suffering from dementia. But then on the other hand, in terms of the carers, one of the things that's been demonstrated to best ease the load for carers is a better understanding of what's going on. And this is exactly what Home Instead have done. They have this fantastic program which provides information so that it's practical information that you know, my father is doing this, and you can connect to somebody who can actually provide you with their own experience and their own advice. And I think, again, applications which can help you make those connections and get access to that information will be really useful, and they're both very simple and pretty cheap to develop.
Paul,
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
just following in that conversation, but broadening it a little bit from Alzheimer's explicitly, which I totally agree is when people say to me, okay, Hoden, this is great, aging, interesting, what's the one thing? And I will always say Alzheimer's. It will become not just, it's moved from a health problem challenge to a family and societal crisis, and it will become a fiscal nightmare. It'll bankrupt us all if we don't get better at care and ultimately find the cure. But where that takes you to is the broader topic of elder care, which then takes you to another interesting way to think about the business opportunities and where the corporation of today is or not, and maybe in 5 or 10 years. We were talking about it in the pre-session. I am absolutely convinced, as I look at the landscape, that elder care will be, to the next several years, and to the progressive and successful and winner corporations, as childcare was in the 70s and 80s when it was just starting. Childcare came about as a result of women entering the workforce and the needs that led to, and the winning companies were the ones that wanted to attract and retain the best talent, and one of the ways to do that is to give people what they want and need. Increasingly, the 48 to 52-year-old employee, most of the time it tends to be the woman, but wherever that winds up, will have huge elder care needs. And the company that begins to design its benefits programs to enable, facilitate, allow for that kind of elder care need, it may not be on the premises the way child care was, although it might, but it will be in different forms, will be very competitive. that will also then begin to open up a whole new business opportunity. So what will happen in this space is by combining self-interest with the right thing, you will have competitive advantage and explosion of business opportunity, which itself will lead to economic growth. You know, classic win-win-win. And so that's what's going to happen in this marketplace. It's an interesting example that, you know, we've barely even scratched the surface on, because most corporations are not doing it today.
Yeah, Paul.
So Jody, and if I want to revert to Roger's point for a second. So when I talk about this routinely, the response I get on this notion of continuing value, continuing work, et cetera, is people say, well, gee, Paul, that's great for you. You have an encore career. You used to run a major law firm, et cetera. There are people in the technology space who will figure out the wonderful, you know, talking pill boxes and driverless cars and the like. How does this work for most of the population who are subject, let's be candid, to age discrimination, may not have retraining, et cetera? This question of caregiving, this opportunity to address not just the supply side that we know exists. I would venture, we won't ask for a vote, but I would venture if we took a vote of people in this audience who are boomers and said, how many of you want to continue doing something later in life? A vast majority would say yes, and I think nationally a vast majority would say yes, and I think globally that would be true. So everyone acknowledges that we have a supply side.
That cuts across income.
Right, supply side opportunity across income. One of the things that people argue about is demand side. So where are the opportunities? How can people, not just at the top of the pyramid, but at the base of the pyramid, have these opportunities? This notion of rethinking caregiving, this notion of connecting people who need work and purpose and engagement later in life with those in need is an incredibly powerful concept. Roger is a pioneer in this. Even with 1,000 franchises on a relative basis, it's a small business globally relative to the size of both the challenge and the opportunity. And a huge amount of money is going to be made in this area by private equity funds, by hedge funds, by major corporations across the world who recognize this opportunity.
The one category of investor you didn't mention is venture. And you know, to me, the most exciting thing is actually what's happening in the startup space. So we partner with a variety of healthcare accelerators like Startup Health, Rock Health, HealthBox, Blueprint Health, Tiger Labs, and others. And we've seen just in our own initiatives over 400 companies in less than 2 years in the consumer health space, focused on the 50 plus, who didn't exist here, you know, 2-3 years ago. And, you know, of the companies that have been finalists at our events, out of 20, 11 of them have raised like $28 million in investment. A 12th was just acquired by Weight Watchers. So there's all that activity, and that's just our initiative. But let me just give you some other data. Funding for digital health focused on people over 50 rose from in 2013 from $425 million in investment to over 1.15 billion, from 49 deals to 248 deals. And increasingly, and this is counter what's happening in the venture capital community, where less and less deals are happening early stage. In this space, more and more deals are happening early stage. So over that same period, it went from like 25 early stage deals to 183.
You know what they should also be thinking of is actually lending money to older people, to older entrepreneurs. Because in fact, as we heard, the most successful entrepreneurs in the United States are over 60. That's what the evidence shows for people who have startups.
People who are in their 50s and 60s start companies at twice the rate of people in their 20s.
And that brings us back to the beginning, where this latest piece of data that we now have, literally, I think you said it was released 4 o'clock this morning, that's where people want to be.
Yeah,
Right?
I was actually just at a graduation ceremony. We sponsor a course on starting a business with Kaufman Foundation, and I had to drive down to Irvine during rush hour, and that was an experience. And it was a graduation class for 21 boomer entrepreneurs. And you know, it's just incredible demand. So we have like 15 seconds left. So one very quick takeaway that you want people to remember.
So I guess we have to start Age Bank, start Age Ventures, start a whole series of other things. This is a great opportunity. It's a great challenge, and this is going to change the world.
And I think that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.